officer or member of the public addressing the committee has concerns with this, please contact the committee services officer immediately. For those at home viewing the webcast, I would like to inform you that if you look above the video, you will see a resources tab. Select this and a link to the agenda will appear on the right hand side. This will allow you to open the agenda in PDF form and follow discussion and debate. Can I please remind members that they need to turn the microphone on when speaking, otherwise what they say will not be captured on the webcast. Please can I also ask that members turn their microphones off when not speaking to avoid microphone feedback. Welcome members, and obviously welcome everybody that's come this evening, and welcome to officers as well. If we could move to agenda item number 2, please. Apologies for absence. I have 3 apologies. I have Councillor Johnson. Councillor Wendy Clements is deputising for. Thank you, Councillor Clements. Councillor Camphor. Councillor Manty is deputising for. Councillor Camphor, thank you. And Councillor Tony Cossier and Councillor Joe Bird is deputising. Thank you. Do we have any other apologies? No, thank you. If we can now go on to agenda item 3, please. Member declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Walsh.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have 2 daughters who work in the NHS.
Thank you. Is there any other declarations of interest?
My husband is a retired police officer. I don't know whether that has...
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Any other declarations? No? Okay, could now move to agenda item 4, please, the minutes. Members that were present at the last meeting, are you happy with the minutes? Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Mitchell, thank you. And could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Walsh. Thank you. I believe we have to sign the minutes now. Do you want that to be done now, Dan, or...? That's in there, isn't it?
Just sign that for me, please. And there's the set before last as well, if you don't mind.
Pardon?
The set before last. We can sort it before we go.
Okay, thank you. If we could now move to agenda item 5, please. Do we have any public questions or statements? No? Okay, thank you. If we can now move to agenda item number 6, which is on your pages 7 to pages 82. I'd like to obviously thank and also introduce Community Engagement Officer. Could I hand over to yourself then, please, Emily? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much for having me. It's very strange to be back at a council meeting, having left them in May, so it's very nice to be back. So I think you should all have copies of my police and crime plan and also the medium-term financial strategy, because I think those are some of the issues that you were keen to look at. So I hope you've had a chance to look at some of that before the meeting. What I thought would be useful was just to briefly run through what's in the plan, what my kind of key priorities are, particularly for anyone who's not had a chance to look at the plan yet, and then obviously open up to questions and any particular issues that just, I suppose, some background. Every PCC has to produce a plan. It's a statutory document. It outlines my policing and community safety priorities for my term of office up to just after the next election. A lot of it was based on things that I had in my manifesto. You know, a lot of the things that I had talked about in the lead up to the election, but I also did a very thorough consultation exercise during the last few months as well, just to try and make sure that we were covering the issues that crime. We know we still have issues around serious violence and drug dealing and issues like county lines, really kind of core day-to-day business of what the police do. So I was really keen that that stayed as a priority within my plan. I've also included retail, business crime and also fraud and cybercrime. These are very growing areas of crime within Merseyside. Cybercrime in particular, and obviously given the last couple of years that we've had, is a growing issue and is getting more complicated. Policing, they want to see police officers engaged in their street, engaging in the community and being easily accessible. So that's within that area of priority, as well as tackling things like acquisitive crime, which is things like burglary and robbery, and also road safety, which again was a big issue that came up across the consultation and speaking to people on the doorstep. So the second pillar then is around supporting victims and safer communities. This is a real kind of key issue for me, and again something that came up a lot when you speak to victims of crime. So really keen to focus on how we tackle that. In addition, talking about hate crime as well, we have unfortunately seen some rises in hate crimes over the last year or so, particularly as lockdown has lifted. So really keen that we look at that, understand the impact on the victim and make sure that support is in place for victims of those types of crimes. And then I've also included in there a wider support around support for communities in general, because we know that some crimes will affect and then the final pillar is around driving change and prevent offending. So this for me is the kind of early intervention prevention work. What we want to do is stop crime from happening in the first place. Now obviously with resource distress that's always a bit of a challenge, but I wanted to make sure that was in here because it's really important that we don't lose sight of that the end goal here is to stop there being victims of crime in the first place. So looking at that early intervention work, looking at things like working with young people, how do we divert them so I have specific powers of oversight when it comes to the Chief Constable and the police. I don't have the same powers in relation to the criminal justice system. However, I am required to bring them all together, and I regularly chair something called the Merseyside Criminal Justice Board, where we will look at how people move through the system and how they might go from the police to the and there is going to be an action plan that will sit underneath all of this to deliver the priorities I've identified, but very keen to highlight the fact that I'll be working in partnership. Obviously, we cannot police our way out of crime. We have to work with people like yourselves, with local authorities, with fire service, with health partners, again, very relevant to the subject of keen to raise with the government and with ministers when I meet with them. And then finally, that important, I'll say finally, but probably most importantly, I won't go into detail on the MTFF, on the medium-term financial strategy, just because it's very technical. I'm very happy to answer questions on it. It's probably worth just highlighting that. So we've had the spending review, but we will be having the policing settlement in December at some point, similar to the local government one. And so we will have more information at that point as to what the future might look like in terms of our budget and how we might plan ahead. So happy to there'll be more information at that point, but I'll certainly answer any questions I can do based on what you've got in front of you so far. Is that okay? Yeah?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question would be for the Superintendent. Some time ago, I think it was last year now, there was an instance in Grange Road in Birkenhead where there was some youths and one of them was seen carrying a machete. And because of the nature of what they were carrying, and it was reported to the police by residents and shoppers, etc., the special sort of force come out to actually deal with the issue. But there was quite a delay the residents felt, and I was just wondering whether Wirral, and I was
like that would be, I would imagine, be graded as a grade 1, a priority incident, and those time scales where we would anticipate that we answered that call within 10 minutes and respond within 10 minutes.
As well to that. So, sorry.
Sorry.
In terms of the, because one of the things I didn't mention was about the scrutiny programme that I will be doing. And one of the areas that I will be scrutinising is response times. So as Martin has pointed out, there is
Well, is we do have our own internal audit processes, so we review things currently all the time.
part of Wirral, obviously there'd be a further delay on that really. So that was my concern really, that the whole area is looked at in terms of response time.
Yeah, so just to answer that, all our patrol vehicles for response and resolution are funding out of. We have level 2 resources, so resources that do come over from Liverpool. So the matrix are all based in Liverpool, but we have those assisting us at times. So that's why those patrols may have been from Liverpool, but they would have been working on the Wirral at the time.
So in my ward of Bromber and New Ferry, there was a huge explosion 4 years ago, and a scrutiny report earlier last year pulled out lessons to be learned from that. And it was very difficult actually to get responses from the police about the major response incident, the strategic goal command meeting that should have been held during that major incident. And I was still waiting for answers actually.
So I think most information should already be available. So Mark, I presume, might be able to access some of that, but we are trying to get a response together for you for that. So I'm sorry it's taken a long time. Understanding the role that local councils will play in terms of engaging with communities, knowing what problems are there, and the
Phone number is available, and please contact me. Don't hesitate.
My second question is around resourcing and priorities for resources. I noticed that the budget tracked and from the resourcing of policing doing the everyday jobs in my ward and probably other wards.
I don't know the specific figures off the top of my head. I don't know if you know them. We can certainly, I think you've emailed about that as well, so again we can find the specific figures for you. In terms of the wider budget, I'll be honest and say we don't have enough money to do what we need to do, and that's the honest truth. And it's a conversation again that I've had with the Minister to say we need more money because we need more police officers on the streets so we can be everywhere that we need to be. So it is, there is no other remit to do that. So I asked the Chief Constable about how we fund events like that, but the reality is if there's a problem, if there's an incident, if there's intelligence that says there might be an issue, then they put police officers there, and it does have an impact on neighbouring areas, and all we can do is say we do our best. Well, I know they do their best to try and manage it, and I will obviously hold them to account as to how they do that, but
and based on risk assessments, threat assessments and everything else, that was what was deemed was necessary by the commander on that day. You may remember that there was an incident with 2 males
Yes, the point is well made, and we're working on it, and we'll get a response as soon as we can. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, if I may. The first one is in relation to, it's following on from the comment that Steve made earlier on. It's the ability to monitor the nighttime economy in Birkenhead and make sure that our communities are safe. I want to say this as someone who lives on the periphery, and those who don't know me, I live in Easton, which is next to Cheshire, Western Cheshire. And if anything happens in Birkenhead, the policing in my area disappears. And it's a regular thing. And I know you're going to say it's due to the lack of police officers and funding. I understand all that. But there's a question that goes on from that. And I'd like you to answer the first one first. In that, what are you doing to improve the nighttime economy in our areas on the Wirral?
There are lots of work being done. We've had high visibility in all areas of the nighttime economy, Operation Clear, Operation Target. We've got the Violence Reduction Partnership. There are a myriad of funding streams that we are tapping into and maximising our potential to police nighttime economy and violent crime in general. So I can't give you specifics now, but I'm happy to discuss that with you at length. The last couple of weeks, where there has been violent incidents in Birkenhead city centre, we have responded to them correctly. We've arrested individuals, we've charged individuals, we've temporarily closed bars down. So we are taking positive action all the time to address these issues.
Age range of our constables and the amount of new officers coming in, where does the differential fall? Because, as you know, you can retire at a certain age, and talking to a lot of police officers who are struggling like a lot of other people, looking at whether to take early retirement and go. Now, the amount of people that are going to retire in the next 5 years and the amount of new officers that you're going to take on, does that correlate? And the second part of that question is, how many, sorry, but that's a fly annoying me, how many of the new officers actually stay the course?
So, I suppose in terms of the age gap, I think this is what comes from not being able to recruit as many as we would have liked for that period of time. And, you know, obviously that was before I took over as PCC, and obviously before the current Chief Constable took over as well. But you know, that is a challenge. Work being done on that. In the last couple of years, there has been increase in police officers, thanks to some additional funding. So there is, by the end of the year, there'll be 660 new police officers across Merseyside. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the rest of your question about that.
It was the correlation, the balance between those retiring and the ones coming in, and how many of the new ones stay, because...
So in terms of, obviously, there is a lot of them have only just started the last couple of years. We'll be monitoring all of that. Again, if anybody's interested, my last scrutiny meeting that I did with the Chief Constable was specifically about workforce. So we addressed some of these issues in terms of what recruitment they're doing, you know, things like diversity, things like routes in, because there's different routes for new officers coming in.
Can I just bring Mark in, please? Just obviously just to sort of add to obviously what Superintendent said, please, before we ask the next one. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the question that Councillor Mitchell asked about again, I think we need to be realistic that the likelihood of having a police officer there on the ground to have eyes on every incident that occurs is probably, it's just never going to happen. So we need to use and embrace technology to be able to direct resources and to also, more Martin and the police and the Commissioner those bids have been put in jointly together, and that's been a real fundamental shift to where we were previously, I would suggest, yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm fortunate to have 2 CCTV cameras on the front of my house, and Mr Earl's colleagues have been to my house on numerous occasions to take pictures of people in my area. The other question is in relation to road safety. With the closure of Bromborough Police Station and moving it to Bebington, we lost the traffic police from this part of my part of the peninsula. And I often wonder whether we're doing enough to make sure when you see anything in relation to road traffic now, there's a lot of insured people out there. It's due to financial situations with people in that respect. But there's a lot more needs to be done to prevent traffic crime. And I wonder if there is any specific policy that you're going to bring forward in relation to the Wirral in that.
In terms of the broader approach to road safety, so the Road Safety Partnership, we are about to sign off the Vision Zero strategy, which is, again, it's a partnership, so it's looking at working with local authorities and obviously highway engineers, the police, and also looking at things around education as well to try and get the three E's, education, enforcement and engineering. So they're about to publish their strategy, which is about Vision Zero. We're doing lots of work with Pauline from Road Peace, she's brilliant, and the organisation is fantastic and does loads of work to highlight, and she's from the Wirral and she's done lots of work to try and highlight the implication of road safety and what could happen when it all goes wrong. So there's absolutely tons of work being done. Once the strategy is signed off, we will, there'll be more work that will follow that in terms of specific targeted campaigns, in terms of the different areas. Martin can speak more specifically about what the police are doing. There has been some training programmes over in the Wirral, for example, around biker safety, I came to view one of those a couple of months ago, and that was based over here. There'll definitely be loads of things that we can give you, so I can get some more detail, but Martin might know specifics around policing.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, we are doing a significant amount of work on road safety, and we are well supported by the motorway police, who operate all the roads within the North West. We have, although they are not based here, we regularly have, well, we always have traffic response vehicles working within the Wirral. We're doing, I think, the Commissioner touched on education. We are doing a lot of educational work, certainly within our schools, with our schools officers. We're doing bike campaigns, motorbike campaigns, quad bikes, absolutely a full range of things that we're doing. We can always do more, and I accept that, but we are doing a significant amount of education and enforcement within the traffic regulations, including the tunnel police and days of action, specific days of action targeting driving offences.
Just say, the group that you mentioned before, obviously it's been going on for a long time because they're the ones that give us the reports for KSIs in the authority, so that's nothing new. It's nothing new, but I would like to make sure that it's strengthened, because in the past, in other committees, we've always asked the question, why isn't more done? Why isn't more done? Because, one person being killed is one too many, and we have large figures. But
just if I could just come in there, councillors, again, it's on the Safer Wirral Partnership Board, it's on our community safety strategy, road safety, so it is being addressed, and there will be an action plan that sits behind that as well.
And the last point I was going to say is, we had your officers into one of the schools I'm a governor of, and they do a fantastic job, and it's something that needs supporting wholeheartedly, so that they're still out there doing the good work that they're doing. Thank you.
Yes, I would agree. I think the schools officers are brilliant. It was one of my pledges in my manifesto to have schools officers, and they are back. I can't really take credit for it, but they are back, and they are doing a really good job, as you say, and engaging the schools. So, yeah, no, absolutely, I agree.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Emily and colleagues, for coming this evening and for presenting your report. I note that already in this discussion there's been reference to the fact that there's insufficient resources, and I assume that one of the reasons for that is because the disbursement of resources nationally isn't fair. And the reason why I assume that is because one of your core principles is for fairer funding for our region. So I wonder if you could tell us more about why it's unfair and what could be done by government to make it fairer. Thank you.
So we are about to start a process of what they call a funding formula review. So this is basically when you've got the funding pot. It's, if you've got the pie, it's how do you divvy up the pie between all the different police forces across England and Wales. The challenge we have is the criteria that they use within it. I don't think reflects enough the issues that we have on Merseyside, particularly around poverty and austerity, and the impact that we know that has on crime and antisocial behaviour. I think my broader point around, so that process is starting, and I'll be lobbying to make sure that actually we get a fair deal from that. I should say Merseyside already does perform quite well out of it in terms of per head of population. We do already get quite a high amount. So there'll be a lot of backlash from other more rural forces who I think will say we already get too much. I think the point about the fairer funding is actually it's beyond the police, and it goes back to my point of saying we cannot police our way out of crime. You cannot just constantly enforce, and lock people up. We need to look at funding other organisations like local authorities who actually are probably integral to being that early intervention approach and dealing with adult social care and children's social care and mental health, which plays a huge role in terms of driving offending and demand on police. And it's the last place that they should be. We should have a really well-funded mental health resource who can support them in the right way. So I suppose when I talk about fairer funding, although I'm particularly interested in the policing settlement, actually I see my role as to be, to join it with the LGA and, other partners to say actually all of these, all of the public sector and all of the organisations that come together, they all need more funding and investment, because actually the role that you play in reducing demand on the police is huge. And so that, I think, it's the broader point of actually how do we make sure the local authorities' budgets aren't being cut in the way that they have been.
Thank you, Emily. I thought that was an excellent response. I mean, just to put a bit more flesh on the bones of that, this authority in the last 10 years has lost £224 million from its budget. And that level of austerity is going to impact on our communities, and one of the effects of those impacts is going to be higher levels of crime and offending, and I know that colleagues are nodding with that. So I think it's absolutely right for you to position the answer to the question that I gave you in the way that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mountney.
Chair, thank you. Commissioner, thank you for coming. You highlighted at the beginning of your statement that a number of strategic priorities, and one of those was the breaking of the chain of crime. Can I ask you what specific resources that fall under your remit you have allocated to do that job, please?
So one of the areas I'm looking at is I mentioned the Criminal Justice Board. So I have a Criminal Justice Board manager who facilitates that process. And one of the things that we are looking at is around what they call out-of-court disposals. So there is a process by which if somebody is arrested by the police for a particular crime, there will be a certain criteria or a threshold by which, rather than putting them through the court system, we will be able to, or the police officers will be able to make a judgment to say, actually, the cause that you're offending, you know, it feels like there's an issue around alcohol abuse here, for example, rather than trying to put you in court and getting you a sentence that isn't going to help that, we will give you what they call an out-of-court disposal, and they will refer you onto a programme that will hopefully try and treat your alcohol addiction. So there's lots of work being done around that. I'm trying to think of some other specific examples. It's a bit of a work in progress, you know, though that's some of the early work that we're doing. There will hopefully be more as we go down the route, but that's probably the most obvious one.
I was just going to add to that, really. Obviously, you'll be aware the new Chief Constable, one of her priorities is preventative crime, and she's dedicated a whole new strand, headed up by Chief Inspector Andy Ryan, to prevention of crime, and that is about breaking the cycle of crime and preventing crime at the earliest opportunity, so reducing our demand on all the services, you know, going forward.
Excuse me, sorry. I forgot to mention as well, actually, we do fund a number of services. So they're specifically for victim services. So it's a specific grant we get from the Ministry of Justice, but that is specifically looking at child exploitation. So, for example, the issue of what we call county lines, young people who are kind of exploited into criminality, how we get them away from that criminality, we treat them as victims of crime. So I commission a number of services, including Catch 22, who do some of that direct work and direct intervention with young people at risk of criminality. So that's another example that following on from the prevention work.
Thank you for that. There's been quite a lot of work done into the committing of crime, and people tend not to commit crime if their chances of being caught are red flagged to them, or their chances of, if they're caught, the punishment is going to hurt them. And in order to do that, you have to intervene at an early point. Now, I'm a ward councillor in West Kirby and Thurston, and I'm not alone in saying this because we all have our issues. We're at the end of a train line and we suffer, fortunately, not major crime, but we suffer a lot of antisocial behaviour and young people's crime. And I think we're a great place to start intervening with breaking that chain of crime. We get lots of kids, lots of younger people, both from our ward and coming in, that commit antisocial behaviour. And I think that starts them, because they do it once, they don't get caught, they'll do it again, they don't get caught. And I think we need to try and intervene. And I know the superintendent's going to tell me he's not got enough guys to do it, so that's why I asked, what are we doing? What resources have you got to break that chain?
Yes, so, and it's a good point, and, you know, I'll refer back to probably what I've said previously in terms of, you know, resources, and the fact that so many of our youth services have been hit so hard, I think has definitely caused some challenges around that, and, you know, they don't often have anywhere else to go, and sometimes that is part of the cause of the issues. Part of that was the reason I did the Youth Diversion Fund, which ran over the last couple of weekends, so particularly over Halloween and Bonfire, where we know there is a spike in things like ASB and criminality, so, and obviously, I think we've heard recently that there's been a 50% drop this year in reports of ASB, which is really positive from all the work that partners have done. So yeah, so the Youth Diversion Fund was part of that, to look at, can we put activities on, can we fund some youth organisations to do some activities to try and deter them away from causing antisocial behaviour on the streets.
I was just going to add there, I know that I've had numerous meetings with your community in West Kirby and surrounding areas. We have funded heavily this year Operation Beach Safe and Park Safe, and I think from the community, messages that I have got from the community is you have seen a difference this year, and that is, as you say, we've gone out early with enforcement, we've started early, and we've set our stall out early with our partners, both from local authority, street intervention workers, the fire service, transport, and although I know there's not a barrier yet at the train station, but they're the sort of things that we are working towards, and I think the community will say that they have seen a difference this year.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, please.
I can say, and I thank you so much, we have seen a difference, because there has been a very imaginative intervention initiative brought forward, including work in priority areas across multi-agency, and that has made a terrific difference. It's high priority. The community likes to see, it's reassuring to people to see the police on the streets there. It's community engagement, they're there. But also, it's not just about that, but about an intelligence-led approach here in the pursuit of crime prevention. And in my view, I think that is a cost-effective way. Prevention is a cost-effective way of dealing with this. Going forward, I just would like to ask Superintendent Earl, how as this is working and we're seeing quite a considerable difference, it's not perfect, but there is definitely a difference, and the community are telling us that. How can you develop or refine this intelligence-led approach or lead? How could it be developed in our neighbourhood?
In terms of intelligence-led, it is very difficult. We appeal to the communities to work with us to rebuild resilient communities, working with them. I think it's a whole system approach, working with all our partners and feeding all that information in. There is a vast amount of data there, schools, educational authority, partners and charities, and we need to use that to our benefit really, and to look at sort of the seasons, the trends. The one thing we can't control in that area is the weather, unfortunately, and the weather makes a big difference, as you well know, and we can have all the police in the world, and if it's raining, you know, then that's a waste of resources that could have been put somewhere else. We are very flexible, and we would move those resources quickly and make use of them, but that's the one thing we can't control. But as I say, we use Crime Stoppers, appeal to any information, you know, coming forward. And one thing I have stressed with all the communities within the Wirral is please report crime to us, because if people don't report things to us, we don't know that it's happening. So I'm very passionate about you telling us what's going on so we can record it and we can deal with it.
Thank you so much for that answer, and do pass on our thanks to the personnel who are dealing with this. They're really working very hard, and we very much appreciate that. It's a really good start. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clements, please.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to be long, but I wanted to mention Operation Inclusion, which is the out-of-court disposal system project, piloted in Wirral, which gained favour in the recent inspection of the Wirral Youth Justice Board, and you'll know all about it. But I think it's really brilliant to see that kind of thing, that kind of intervention to try and catch young people before they become criminalised. And also, I really enjoyed reading in the report about the success you've had on county lines. And that's brilliant, because I just feel very passionately how damaging this whole thing is, and I want to encourage you and urge you to do more and more, and anything that the Children's Committee can do to support that work, we'd be really pleased to. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Clement. Councillor Martin, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, Emily and Superintendent Earl, for your detail and candour in the answers that you've given us hitherto, and also your, the report that you gave. I'm thinking similar to what Councillor Mitchell said about the licensed and the nighttime trade. So as venues have started to open back up again, plenty are having to do so with a reduced level of door security as any kind of way of cutting costs or you know, scaling back in order to try and make up some of the money that they've lost as a result of the decimation that they've suffered over the past 18 months. As a result, the risk of unsavoury incidents and their ability to spiral out of control has kind of gone up. And I'm thinking of one particular incident in my ward in New Brighton, where there was a gentleman who was reported to be wielding an offensive weapon. He then went from one area within the ward up to a different one, and that came as a complete surprise to the members of staff and also to the very limited security team that were up there. So I suppose my question is, are there any intentions to enable venues to report any issues direct to the police or to the community patrol? Maybe to put into place some kind of communication system, and even for the venues to be able to speak to one another, because that probably could have been prevented or at least prepared for if they would have known further up the ward what was happening further down the ward. Councillor Wright just mentioned adopting an intelligence-led approach to crime prevention. And speaking personally, I was assaulted some time ago, a few years ago, and that was also caught on CCTV by somebody similarly who was going round a couple of venues. Now, that guy never got caught, and all I saw on CCTV was me getting flattened as many times as I wanted to. But it could have been prevented by potentially having something like that in place. Is there the ability or the funding or resource to do it?
So I've just met today with Inspector Alan McEwen, who's doing a lot of work in that area and is holding meetings with the licensing in that area. Also the taxi companies, and he's got the Chamber of Commerce that he's working with. So there are numerous plans, all in the infancy at the moment, but innovative ideas such as you know, making sure that the bars close at different times slightly, so you know, to reduce the footfall, making sure there's female taxi drivers available for you know, coming back to the Vogue strategy, and you know, lots of different ideas, all early days yet, but Alan McEwen, as I say, is working very closely with the businesses and the companies down there, including partners and Chamber of Commerce.
Just to mention as well, well, two things. So hopefully some of you will be aware that we've launched the You're Safe Here training programme. So we've launched it in Liverpool, but it will apply everywhere. And it's very much aimed at venues, bars and clubs, and particularly the nighttime economy venues who I think we're seeing increasing people feeling very vulnerable and not knowing what to do if people are feeling vulnerable for whatever reason. So we're going to be training all of them so they know who to refer to. That's being done jointly with the police and with licensing and all sorts of other partners, so that if somebody is maybe suffered a hate crime, or maybe is feeling vulnerable because of a you know, a woman's feeling vulnerable because of someone's, I don't know, whatever, been you know, intimidating, there is somewhere where they can go that will be safe and they'll know how to respond to that. So we're trying to put lots of investment in training, so actually bars and club staff themselves, not just security, know what to do if somebody is in that position. And then the second point, just in terms of the the kind of the radio communication, that there definitely are other schemes like that across Merseyside. So I think there's loads of practice to build into what Martin's spoken about for exactly that reason, where if something is happening, you can alert people down the line, get the police involved, and everybody can be prepared. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be lots of work that we can support with that.
Just further, obviously we're coming up to a busy period with Christmas. We're about to launch Operation Shepherd, which we do every year, and there's lots of preventative and advice for licensed trade, shops, businesses, retail crime, all sorts, and the community. So that's about to launch, and I've got a further meeting about that in the morning.
Sorry, very briefly. In light of what happened in London, the terrible murder, what is the current strategy policy on single-handed patrols or not, or challenging, or what is your...
For the police, so, you know, nothing's changed for the police as a result of that incident. We will still singly crew cars if need be and deploy as normal, really. Nothing has changed following that incident for policing. Obviously, you know, a tragic incident, and we are very alive to that and doing a lot more risk assessing and things. But nothing's changed in relation to our crewing policy specifically.
Can I just make one extra point on that as well in terms of the broader issue around police response to attacking violence against women and girls? That's going to be the subject of my next scrutiny meeting, which again will be live streamed, and I've asked for questions from the public. If anybody has any questions they want me to ask, so think issues like that, I can put them straight to the Chief Constable, and then you can see the response and see the discussion that it's had. The deadline for that is tomorrow, so if anybody does have any last minute questions, please do send them in this evening if you can, and I will put them to the Chief as well as part of that public meeting.
Thank you. May I just obviously, well, firstly, I'd like to also commend the Merseyside Police, obviously, on page 14, about obviously the outstanding recognition for tackling organised and serious crime, also being the joint best performing, as well as staying in the top 5, obviously, you know, on all that the Merseyside Police do. If I could also just ask, please, Emily, obviously, around, obviously, the precept, because I know, obviously, we get asked a lot about the precept, obviously, because it's based per ward. I know it's Merseyside Police, and sort of things that have been asked tonight and things that obviously are mentioned about obviously funding and stuff. Is it obviously that's how that sort of maybe more sort of best say is spent obviously within Wirral, or the requirement for the precept really, please, if you don't mind. Thank you.
So yes, as you point out, just over 20% of the budget for Merseyside Police comes from the council tax precept. We rely very heavily on the Home Office grant, so any time that the Home Office grant is cut, you know, in previous years we've had the ability, or PCCs have had the ability to ask for an increase in council tax precept for that bit of it, to try and contribute. It will never make up the difference, and this is one of the issues I talk about in terms of fairer funding, to answer Councillor Brennan's point before, whereas places like Surrey might be able to lose 1% of their Home Office grant, will only have to raise council tax by 1% and get the same amount back. Here on Merseyside, we'd have to raise council tax by 3% to get the same 1% back that we've lost. So the kind of the challenge is much bigger, I think, in terms of making up any money that we lose from the Home Office grant. We will know more in the policing settlement come December in terms of the specifics around what actual funding we're getting, any flexibility around the precept that we may be asking for council taxpayers to pay more, but we'll have the detail of that in December, hopefully. I am very mindful of the fact that obviously the police is one small part of a wider council tax bill for residents, so I am very keen to engage with yourself as local councillors and, you know, council leaders, and obviously the Metro Mayor as well, because, you know, and the fire service, because there will be lots of people all facing the same challenges and all looking to council taxpayers. So I'm very aware that there will be that pressure in addition to the rising costs. So it's not something I am looking forward to doing or be keen to do, but I'm going to take a view once I have the detail as to what the policing settlement will look like.
Okay, thank you. Superintendent Hill, would you like to?
Sorry, could I just come back on your point there? I thought you were talking about the death of Sir David Amos, so apologies. No, our staff were fully briefed, briefings down from the Chief Constable, so all our staff have been spoken to and you know, discussed in relation to that tragic event also. So Yeah, sorry, I thought you meant the death.
Yeah, sorry, just to be clear, is there a challenging process in Merseyside, as I think there is in the Met, that you can call in to check that you are a bona fide police officer, etc., etc.?
Yes, certainly. So, and I have, briefed all our staff in relation to that. If you feel that, and certainly officers in plain clothes, all our officers in uniform, will have radios. You will be able to phone up the control room. You can get the officer to shout up on the radio. So all our staff have been briefed in relation to that. Again, if they are in plain clothes, exactly the same procedure. They should have radios, and they will have radios so they can shout up. But by almost any of your communities are concerned at all, just to phone ourselves on 101 or 999 if it's that. But yeah, sorry, I thought it was something else we were talking about.
Thank you. No more questions? No. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for coming this evening and thank you for everything that you do, especially Merseyside Police, especially in these trying times in the pandemic, and obviously, all officers and obviously everyone that's connected with Merseyside Police. And again, thank you for the reports and coming this evening. Thank you very much indeed from all of us.
Thank you very much for having us. And if there's any follow-ups or any questions, I know we've got a few things to get back to on. Please just let us know and we'll do what we can. Thanks.
Recommendation, I've forgotten that. I do apologise. Could I have the recommendation, obviously, that we have, obviously, for the report? Do I have a proposer, please, at all? I'm happy to propose it, and I could have a second to them, please. Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Committee, we'll have that by assent? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you again. Thank you. If we could now move, please, thank you, to item number 7 on the agenda. These are pages 83 to 360. Wirral Clinical Commissioning Group. If I could obviously welcome and hand over to Simon Banks, please, Chief Executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So we've been asked to provide a report around the work of Clinical Commissioning Group. NHS Wirral Clinical Commissioning Group was established in 2013 and is statutorily accountable for the commissioning of health services for the population of Wirral. The information before you is all in the public domain, the annual report covering the year 2021 and the current financial quality safety constitutional standards for the current financial year 2021-22. Also appended is the commissioning policy as the councillors wish to see that, which covers procedures low clinical value as well, which I can confirm has not changed during the pandemic, but will possibly be subject to change when we move to become part of the Integrated Care Board. So as it's, the annual report makes clear, we commission most of the hospital and community services in Wirral. We also have delegated responsibility for the commissioning of general practice services from NHS England and discharge that on their behalf. And we also work in partnership with Wirral Council through the vehicle of Wirral Health and Care Commissioning, which has enabled us to pool resources, financial and otherwise, for the benefit of the people of Wirral, particularly around community services, services for people with learning disability and or autism. And we have the largest pooled fund in Cheshire and Merseyside because of the work we've done over the last 4 years or so. The Health and Care Bill was introduced to Parliament on the 6th of July of this year. It confirms the government's intentions to introduce statutory arrangements to introduce integrated care systems, and within those integrated care boards will take on the statutory functions of clinical commissioning groups. So the transfer of CCG staff, assets and liabilities, including our commissioning responsibilities and contracts, subject to legislation, will go to the Integrated Care Board on the 1st of April 2022. So we're currently in a process whereby we're supporting and transition to that new statutory organisation and ensuring that those functions, responsibilities and people transfer across safely and effectively from the 1st of April, on the 1st of April. That means we're essentially, for the foreseeable future, doing three things. We're supporting our system partners through a very challenging time for health and care, a time where COVID remains present and prevalent in society, and we have increased rates of COVID recently, and we're still seeing hospitalisations because of that. We are about to head into a very challenging winter period where we know demand increases. So our job, as working with the local authorities, the commissioners of the system, is to ensure our providers get the support to do what they need to do in that regard, and we acknowledge the efforts the workforce have put in over the last 18 months and continue to put in terms of delivering the best possible care they can. The second thing we will need to do is ensure we have the essential governance in place as a statutory organisation to work within the law and to achieve our statutory duties, and therefore that means principally achieving financial balance at the end of half year 2. So this year unusually has been split into funding for half year 1, which is April through to September, half year 2, October through to April, but the requirement remains to break even, which at the moment we are on track for doing based upon the latest financial projections for the CCG. And then finally, as I said, we need to look after our people in the wider NHS health and care workforce, but specifically my duty of care towards my employees, who I am seeking to make sure that through the employment commitment given by NHS England, they will transfer into a new employer on the 1st of April next year safely and effectively, and will continue to contribute not just to the work of a Cheshire Merseyside integrated care system, but particularly into Wirral as a place within that integrated care system, and to continue to build on the partnerships we have in place with the local authority. So I appreciate there's a lot of information appended to this report. As I said, it's all in the public domain, and papers for our November governing body are due out tomorrow. They're a day late because we've also had to do some work around changing some governance arrangements across the clinical commissioning groups, or proposals to change some governance arrangements across the clinical commissioning groups in anticipation of that transition from really working from now through to the end of March. But it will be the usual suite of reports out tomorrow, which include finance, quality and safety and constitutional standards as well. So I'm happy to take any questions, and as with previous speakers, if I don't have the answers readily available, we'll come back to the committee with them.
Thank you. Do I have any questions, please, from members? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned it just now, but in 3.6 in the report, and it's the changes from the CCGs to the clinical, the Integrated Care Board. Will there be any savings in that transaction? And will those savings stay within the funding regime and not be used to help with the budget process for next year?
So there will be some savings in terms of running cost allowance, because the running cost allowance of the so let me just rewind. Let me just explain what an integrated care system is. An integrated care system has 4 component parts. There's a statutory integrated care partnership whereby the NHS has a committee with local authorities and other partners. There's an integrated care board, which is the NHS body. They're the statutory components. Also within integrated care systems, there'll be place-based partnerships. So there'll be a partnership for Wirral, and there will be what they call provider collaboratives, which is encouraging providers to work closely together to deliver better outcomes for people, and really stepping away from what 35 years of competitive practice that's been encouraged by the policies of the time. In terms of this change, the Integrated Care Board will be giving a running cost allowance. So since 2013, CCGs have had running cost allowances, so it will be the aggregate of that The running cost allowance is separate to what we spend on patient care. So my running cost allowance is about 0.85% of the budget of 650 million or so. So the rest of it goes to patient care, it goes into medicines optimisation, it goes direct to the hospitals, etc. So there will be some marginal savings in the running cost allowance because we will be losing people from board positions. So some of the lay members will be going, the secondary care doctor will be going from our board, so there'll be changes to boards, there'll be savings within that. And obviously we will also look to see if we can make savings in terms of our estates costs, transport, etc., because it's also environmentally sensible to do so, isn't it? But the overall quantum of resource will remain the same for patient care, and in fact we're obviously waiting for the funding settlement for next year. We've had increases in this year as well, so there has been additional resources into Cheshire and Merseyside. So in short, there will be some savings, they won't impact on patient care, and they will be around managerial and savings.
If I may, Chair, you said there was extra funding for this year, but that was in relation to the pandemic that's gone through the whole of the world, and we can't guarantee that those extra fundings will continue once integrated care boards are in place in April next year.
So some of the short-term COVID money will be withdrawn, but there is also the long-term plan commitments that we need to meet. So we will still need to maintain around mental health investment standard. It would be our intention to maintain the pooled budgets with Wirral Council at a similar rate, or actually seek to pool more resources in there. So we are only just aware about a month and 6 to 7 weeks ago we became aware that the funding settlement was for H2. We are still unaware of what the funding settlement will be for 2022-23 as a whole.
Thank you. Could Councillor Mitchell please? Oh, sorry, Councillor Baird. Apologies.
Thanks very much. And thanks for your report. I have a few concerns about the integrated care system as you've described it, and also the name of it compared to the National Health Service. It seems to me, from what you've described, and it's in the documents that I've read, it's about the systems kind of, the system works, the system's got to balance its books, the system's got to do what the system sets out to do, rather than the rights of patients to receive the care that they need when they need it. So what assurances can you give us that the system will say yes, rather than the system saying no when people need it? Thanks.
So integrated care systems are about improving care primarily. They're about making sure that over the years the organisations we've asked to compete through internal markets, or we've separated in terms of the commissioner-provider split, or we've created a distance in terms of what local authorities do and what health does, starting to bridge those gaps. And at the heart of everything is actually doing the best for the people of Cheshire and Merseyside. So it will be about seeking to tackle health inequalities. It will be about ensuring that there is a quality of provision, and all those relevant statutory duties still exist within an integrated care board, within an integrated care system. So it's not simply about balancing the books. However, we do have to live within our means, and therefore we have to look at how we use those resources effectively. And that's why we have to enter into dialogue with our partners in the voluntary community sector, within the local authority, and with others as well, to make sure that happens. So in summary, it isn't all about finance. It has to be about doing the best for local people, ensuring there are quality services, and actually I believe through an increased focus on personalisation of offers, we can actually improve care and live within our means.
Thanks. I didn't quite hear the assurances that I was looking for there. You were talking aspirations and doing our best rather than upholding patients' rights to achievements, though you did, to treatment. Though you did mention statutory duties, maybe you could expand on that a bit more, if you don't mind, kind of straightforward language. Cheers.
Yes, I mean, I can, if you want an assurance, what drives everybody working in an NHS is to provide the best possible care, is to put the person in front of them who needs that care first. And that's the assurance that everybody has to give professionally. I live by a code of conduct as a manager in the NHS. My clinical colleagues also have professional standards. So it is about delivering the best possible care.
I've no doubt people aspire to do the best and they go to work to do the best. It's just that the system might not therefore provide what's required sometimes.
And that's the purpose of the reform, because the system hasn't always provided what's required. The system hasn't had that duty of candour in the past in terms of responding to quality concerns. So the purpose of the development is to improve quality by being more accountable to the public, by being open about quality issues and about understanding what that means across a series of organisations. So I acknowledge that there's been in the past the NHS health and care, and we're dealing with one at the moment in terms of the review of the Corston Park deaths of the people with learning disabilities in their 30s there, and I'm leading the Cheshire and Merseyside response to that because the early warning signs weren't picked up in that particular case. However, with that greater scrutiny from an integrated care system, we would hope to mitigate against such tragedies in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Simon. My question is on the finance report on page 300 and
Yes, so under the current rules, we can break even in terms of income expenditure as we have done the previous financial year and we plan to do this year, but there is the underlying deficit that has to be repaid under the current rules. As that will transfer to the Integrated Care Board, as with other assets and liabilities will transfer. We have made, in the last 2 years, despite the COVID issue, and obviously we've had to bring in extra expenditure for that, to deliver financial break-even last year was, I think, a really, I commend the whole system for that. But we've also meant that deficit hasn't shifted. It's actually slightly improved, and we anticipate it to slightly improve by the end of this year. The only way we can tackle that is to work as a system, which is what we've been doing for the last 5 years with our provider trusts, about looking at where we can work on these things together, where we can streamline care, but also make sure it's about personalisation. We can avoid duplication, we can avoid waste, because none of that helps the person who needs the care. So that will transfer to the Integrated Care Board as a liability, if you like, on the balance sheet.
So, sorry, could I just come in, on the back of what Councillor Berry said. So, if I may, Simon, so the £14 million, obviously, which is the underlying deficit, obviously, if that's, let's say, for argument's sake, that's got to be at zero, whether that be in 2 years' time. That clearly is going to impact on services, on Wirral residents, isn't it? Because, for example, the local, I know you said, obviously, appreciate because of COVID, everyone's been obviously working non-stop, obviously, within the NHS and all the different services. But if they can't obviously have a deficit, I think the concern would be that obviously that would obviously impact on services that you can deliver, even if you wish to deliver them, let's say, because that would have to be an impact, whether it be on acute care, whether that be obviously on GP services, the whole vast of things that you do. Would that also impact on the pool fund? Because obviously there is those joint relationships and those funds. So I think obviously the 14 million, the deficit across Cheshire and Merseyside is much larger than 14 million. I know we're talking about Wirral. So it's sort of, a bit more around how you think, and I appreciate maybe some of this information hasn't come out, but apart from it does say in the white paper that they can't carry a deficit. So it's just to sort of say how that's going to interpret, because you may have no choice but to cut services, whether that be the local commissioning, you know, the clinical need. So if you could just provide a bit more detail, if you don't mind on that, please.
So every year that I've been in the NHS, there's been some sort of improvement programme that's, and certainly the last 10 to 15 years, it's been about quality, innovation, productivity and prevention. So those have always been about trying to, again, live within their means whilst also providing good patient care. So what we've always sought to do is get better value from providers, reduce our management costs, etc. The financial framework for the Integrated Care Board, we're still to see what it looks like. There's been some high-level narrative published about 3 to 4 weeks ago. But as you said, the statutory duty around break-even will transfer to the Integrated Care Board, and then they will have to start thinking also about how collectively we address that. I do not anticipate that it would have a detrimental impact upon the pooled funds for Wirral, as they are largely earmarked. The vast majority of that is earmarked statutorily to support social care, and the rest is to support packages of care mainly, which we wouldn't want to see a reduction in at all.
Thank you. Could I ask, obviously, Councillor Martin, please?
Thanks, Chair. Following on from some of the integrated care system discussion, which has been touched on during this and also various meetings, despite its importance, still tonight it's formed part of an agenda item for which we'll probably have about 30-40 minutes worth of discussion. Can I suggest through you, Chair, that we still are clearly asking questions and calling witnesses on a kind of sporadic basis, that we have at some point, ideally early in maybe 2022, a single item agenda meeting to allow members to become better informed on this transition and even get more witnesses to come in, because I think what we are getting is bits of information at one time. Potentially would it be better to have all this focused on one, given its importance?
Well, that is on the agenda. It is for February. Obviously, the reason why we've asked the CCG to come along is they commission still, and will do till 2022, the service of rural residents. So it's quite hard, isn't it? They're not to step into the ICS territory, but obviously because it's coming down there. But this specifically was about the CCG themselves and what they commission now, and I suppose what pressures they see in the next 12 months besides the ICS. Because we've got COVID and obviously the pandemic, but that's the February meeting. Is that all right? Thank you. Councillor Brennan, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Simon, for coming this evening, and thank you for Councillor Martin for making the first point that I was going to make. Since my understanding was that we're going to have a single item session and invite a range of different voices to hear about the implications of ICS in the new year, I won't ask about ICS. I'll ask about what I think might be the business of the CCG at the moment. And in particular, I'd like to know about whether there are standards or requirements placed on providers for patient feedback. Because I've gone through the 240 or so pages of reports that we've been provided, and forgive me, I've only gone through a couple of times, so it's easy to miss, isn't it? I might have missed references to patient feedback, but I would be interested to know, are the standards that we expect providers to follow in respect of patient feedback?
Yes, there are. So there are standards that they would have to report on their quality accounts. So there'd be standards regarding things like infection control, mixed-sex accommodation. There's also a requirement to receive feedback from patients in terms of the friends and family test, which is also regularly reported through our boards. We would also be looking at the requirements they have around complaints handling as well. And within that, then there's the legal duty of candour about openness and honesty and transparency in responding to those complaints. Most of those would be dealt with in our quality reports. And then also what we have alongside that are serious untoward incident reviews as well with our providers. And again, ensuring the voice of people, patients is heard in that. And then certainly in some of the work I'm leading upon, it's absolutely expected that when we undertake service redesign, when we introduce new services, new ways of doing things, we actually involve the people concerned. So the work we're doing at the moment, particularly around improving services to children, young people with learning disabilities, autism, mental health needs, we're actually asking them what they would like from the services. So we can start to design those services around their specific needs. I'm pleased to say that in my time in the NHS, I came from the voluntary sector, where I was an advocate for people, for patients, into the NHS. That has improved in my time in the NHS, that listening to people and having to have due regard to their views, needs, and responding appropriately to them.
So, for example, would we expect GP practices to have patient advisory committees, and how frequently should those things meet, if indeed they're expected to have them, and what's the mechanisms for taking action if they don't meet?
So we should expect GP practices to have patient participation groups, and I'm not sure that they universally do have within Wirral, or certainly some of them may have stood down during the pandemic. So that's one of the things that, in terms of the discharge of the commissioning responsibilities on behalf of NHS England, we would ask them to demonstrate. If people don't feel that there is an active patient participation group within their practice, if we know about it, we can do something about it. So we always, I always welcome, contact from local councillors, from local members of Parliament around any issue, because it gives us a chance to resolve it, or indeed directly from members of the public themselves. And then we can have a direct conversation with that practice about how we can help them establish their patient participation groups.
Thank you, that's very helpful, and I'm sure people, it's useful for people to know that they can raise that issue direct with yourselves. Just staying on patient feedback for a moment, obviously the pandemic has accelerated to some degree the way in which patients interact, in particular with GP services. So face-to-face is significantly less frequent. When it does happen, there's various triage and different interventions that happen before that happens, usually through e-consult, sometimes on the phone. I've come across a couple of quite elderly people recently who have great amounts of difficulty using e-consult, and the phone arrangements haven't worked for them for various reasons. I think it would be very helpful if GP practices could be required to just have a simple email address where people could raise simple questions with the practice. And I'm pretty clear that not all of them have that, and I think that would help particularly elderly patients who can navigate their way around an email but find it difficult to navigate their way around e-consult, to feel that they're having some sort of communication with medical practitioners. I don't know if that's possible.
So I think you're referring to the issue of access to general practice, and you've had, I think, Dr. Camphor facilitated Rob Barnett to come to the last partnerships committee about this. So this is quite a complex issue in that teleconsultations have been NHS policy. During COVID, the introduction of telecom and e-consult was accelerated. We're now in the process of working with our general practices to increase the in-person rate. So in September, we had the highest appointment rate in England of 0.64 appointments per patient, and the second highest rate of face-to-face, which was 0.44. But figures don't mask the fact, Councillor Brennan, that elderly people who are not digitally literate, people who have a learning disability and autism, do find it difficult on occasions to access their general practice, and that e-consult and total triage should be part of a package that includes face-to-face, telephone and walk-in. And again, if we know where this is not meeting the requirements, again, we can work with our partners in the local medical committee, with the general practitioners themselves and with the primary care networks who will be responsible for delivering much of this going forward to address that. So again, when we get a correspondence in from a member of the public, from an elected member, then we can act upon it and work with our practices, or the 50 practices or so we have. But also behind that, whilst Wirral is quite well doctored, we currently have an increasing demand and a finite amount of GP and other healthcare professional resource. And an e-consult in itself takes the same time to process, in fact sometimes longer than a face-to-face. So what we're trying to do is look at how we can improve the e-consult system, but improve access generally for all the reasons Councillor Brennan actually cites, that it isn't for everybody.
Sorry, if I can just give you a concrete example to try and exemplify why I think an email might be a good way of sometimes people being able to communicate, because I don't think you addressed that question. So there's an elderly patient who's unable to use e-consult, has left a message with the receptionist at their doctor's, has received a text which she understands to mean that she should discontinue taking something on her prescription, but isn't clear about that, so she wants to ask a question about that. She can't respond to the text because the text is one way only and doesn't take responses back, so she's back into the e-consult, leaving messages with the receptionist text loop. And under those circumstances, I would have thought that an email would be an enormously simple way of solving that particular problem.
Yes, it would, and I want to look it up. I'd like to, if the person gives you consent to do so, or even anonymously, I'd like to have that as a case we can look into. But equally, I think it does exemplify where the system here, as Councillor Bird said, the system sometimes doesn't do what we want it to do, and therefore we have to change the system. And absolutely in that case, that seems absolutely ridiculous to me, that there is this loop of text back to e-consult with little human interaction.
Thank you, that's appreciated.
Councillor Walsh, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about health inequalities. Page 114 talks about the life expectancy, 11 years between the east and the west side of the borough, and no sign of it improving. I think it's actually getting worse. What do you think any improvement's going to make with the integrated care system?
So one of the things... Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Director of Public Health, Julie Webster, is going to be holding a seminar, I think, at the end of the month, about looking at us becoming a Marmot community. And we all know the work of Sir Michael Marmot and about the key determinants of health. And actually, a lot of health is, as we've just heard with our presentation from the Police and Crime Commissioner, it is affected by a number of issues. Food, roof and family, I think, I would put it in a nutshell. Access to a job, etc. The purpose of an integrated care system is to start to ensure that how we deploy our health and care resources really thinks about how that impacts on life expectancy, key determinants of health. So I'll give you a practical example in terms of that. And again, it's because it's one of the areas I'm passionate about. People with a learning disability and or autism will die significantly younger than an average person in the population, will have more comorbidities such as respiratory conditions, etc. And what we saw in COVID, that actually this group in our society, as amongst minority ethnic groups, were disproportionately affected. And therefore that it means that we now need to focus upon those groups in terms of additional support, so increasing the rate of health checks for people with learning disability. We've also learnt from the vaccination programme about vaccine hesitancy and vaccine take-up being hesitancy being greatest and take-up being lowest in some of our more economically and socially disadvantaged wards. So that's why we've really directed resource there. So it's not so much about integrated care system as a system, it's about how we approach it and how we approach in that collaborative way, how we work with the local council, particularly with the Wirral plan at the heart of what we do, and we recognise that health and care make a contribution to improving life expectancy. But as Julie, if she was here, would tell you, it probably impacts on 10 to 20% of the person's life and lifestyles. So therefore we have to make it easier for them to get a job, live in warm housing, and have good mental health and well-being as well.
You mentioned Dr. Rob Barnett, because when we asked Dr. Rob Barnett a similar question about access to GPs, which people are finding virtually impossible at the moment because of the telephone system. I know we talked just a bit about the, technology, emails and what have you, but people just trying to get through with telephones, it's virtually impossible. And, so, again, going back to the integrated care system, and Dr. Rob Barnett said he doesn't see it getting any better, it's only going to get worse. Do you tend to agree with that? Or?
We have increasing demand and we have fewer GPs than we had. So actually, we then have to look at what the workforce looks like and ensure that the people contacting the GP surgery, firstly, as Councillor Brennan said, they can get through, but then the triage system works so they get to the most appropriate person. So it could be a pharmacist who would, in that case, have a conversation about the medication and did the medication need changing. It could be a mental health practitioner. It could be an allied health professional who might do some of the blood tests, or it might be actually encouraging the person to self-care. So, when my blood pressure medication needs a review, I get a text saying, can you give us your blood pressure readings? So it's about making sure that the response is much more individualised as well. And then you can spend, as a general practitioner, more time with people with long-term conditions and provide the support around them. So I appreciate where Dr. Barnett's coming from, and I've known Dr. Barnett for a long time, and respect his opinions.
Dr. Barnett was very frank and very honest, to be honest with you.
Thank you. Sorry, Sam, could I just then ask, obviously, because as we know, obviously, we mentioned before the pandemic and after, obviously, so obviously we've got this, obviously, massive life expectancy before the pandemic. So, and it's been getting worked on by different agencies for many years. So what's going to be different? It, obviously, that I would imagine is compounded. Your reports, obviously, one of the things is mental health, isn't it? Obviously, which is whether there's additional support going to be coming in, because I know the service is probably near enough. It's a bit all over the place, isn't it? Really, sort of. So the other thing was also the acute, because obviously, as we know, recently there's been changes to obviously access in Narrow Park Hospital. And whilst I know you're saying about these other things going to a pharmacy, I think Dr. Barnett mentioned the same, is whilst there's some people take those things up, the majority of the public and the people will want to see. And I appreciate, they're still in a pandemic, and the NHS, obviously, the workers and that, they've been through, a horrendous time, haven't they? They've supported a lot of things, all the different departments within the NHS. So it's also, I understand where some of these things would also ease the pressures on the NHS. We're coming into winter, as we all know, and obviously we've still got the COVID around. But I suppose I'm asking sort of where do you see that there being the main pressures really, obviously, as we are now until obviously next year, and how they're going to be worked on, and how we're going to be able to reduce that when the things that have perhaps been introduced previously haven't unfortunately worked. Thank you.
I think given the pressures in the NHS are coming from a variety of perspectives, so there will be the availability of the workforce, and the availability of the workforce because we have, as with other services, there are people retiring, we need to recruit people in. People are very tired from the pandemic, and also we're being asked to put in lots of additional services that workforce needs to keep pace with. There is going to be a growth in need for mental health services, and I hate using the phrase low level, but the sort of that end of counselling, behavioural therapy support, improving access to psychological therapy support. But equally at the other end, I'm seeing pressures in terms of children and young people with eating disorders, particularly presenting and ending up in inpatient facilities. So a lot of the work we are doing is about the preventative agenda. So therefore, that's coming together in things like the Wirral Health Inequalities Group, and ensuring we coordinate responses across agencies. And just in terms of the pressures on urgent care within in the hospital, making sure that we work in concert on that. So there are regular or daily whole system working on how we reduce the pressures, how we manage the here and now, but also how we focus resources and additional access in the areas most in need. So commissioning extra GP access slots across Wirral, particularly focusing on the areas of highest demand, which are the areas of Birkenhead, Wallasey, etc. And also, I think recognising that because A&E is there 24/7, people will go there, and therefore making sure that they're appropriately dealt with, but also there is some discussion with them whilst they're there about the alternatives they could have accessed. But it's then making those alternatives accessible themselves, which goes back to Councillor Brennan's questions earlier.
Thank you. Right, should I just ask again? So obviously, with those extra pressures on top, obviously they also require additional funding to be able to provide those services to the level that people on Wirral require. So will that be in addition to those things that the additional pressures are you receiving at present?
So our budget has gone up to circa 675 million this financial year from 665 last financial year. There is additional investment in GP access funds, which is we've been working through at the moment. There's additional monies for mental health and also for elective care, so the people who are waiting for operations at the moment. And we just had an announcement in the last few days about additional monies, again, for winter pressures in mental health. So resources are coming in. It's just making sure that we keeps pace with the demand that's happening as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions for... Councillor Mounty.
Chair, just briefly. Sorry, I'm new to the committee, so if this is a silly question, I beg your pardon. Do you have any staff that are facing unemployment in April? And if so, what are you doing about it?
So I have on the books... So we have some people whose contracts will be ending. They are our 4 lay members and our secondary care doctor on the board. They're on what's called a contract for services. So on the 31st of March, because the board goes, they will go. And we've got some extremely good lay members and a very good secondary care doctor. We will then have other people on contracts for services who are largely clinicians, sessional, who we would have to have a discussion with, but the majority of staff have an employment commitment, which means their employment service transfers to the Integrated Care Board. There are people at a board level who don't have an employment commitment, but there is, within the HR framework, there is a commitment to work with those people and find roles that meet the needs of the system and hopefully meet their needs as well. So, you know, where we are at the moment, we don't anticipate any redundancies, and actually nor is there any budget set aside for redundancies for 22-23.
Councillor Wright, please.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, there's definitely an urgent pressure on resources. If you look at page 97 and page 5 of the report, it talks about premature mortality. Premature remains an issue locally. It's significantly higher rate from almost all major causes in Wirral compared to England. So there's a very great need. And also alcohol consumption is a major issue on Wirral. So there is a real pressure on resources there, isn't there?
Yes, and alcohol is, again we have, as an offshoot of the Health Inequalities Group, there's been some system work in alcohol consumption in partnership with the local authority, because we are seeing rising rates of hospital admission related to alcohol, and not necessarily from the wards where we would expect in terms of economic and social disadvantage. It's the increase in drinking at home, changing patterns in alcohol consumption, and in terms of people not necessarily sticking to their units, etc. So that again is quite a complex issue that we need to deal with. But again, the local authority being very good and in terms of the work they've done around licensing, and some of the work that's been done around alcohol prevention in that over the last few years around those issues as well. So yes, we do have significant challenges around premature mortality, and as I said, largely in those areas of economic and social disadvantage, or the alcohol does buck that trend.
Councillor Brannan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, a very quick question. I just wanted to check my hearing. Did you say that the budget increase had been basically about 1.5% this year, 665 to 675? Is that what you said earlier?
Yes, I did, Councillor Brenner. The 665 to roughly 675.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. It's a reminder from my colleague next to me, and he was talking about Dr. Barnett, who was very honest, and it was a very nice presentation that he gave. It's one of the best ones I've had since I've been on the council, and that's some years, because the gentleman was so clear and honest with his answers. It was marvellous. One point that you raised before in relation to the amount of meetings with doctors. One of the things is you realise that we've got a higher level of elderly on the Wirral. Put my hand up on that one, I'm one of them. And we do have a tendency to have more ailments, as you can see, with my badge, and many others. One of the things that came to mind was a statement that was made by the Secretary of State a few weeks back, and he was muting about the use of chemists. Now, when Dr. Barnett was talking to us in his honesty, and he said, quite rightly, as Joe said, he was worried and he was concerned about moving forward. Are you looking towards employing nurses, paramedics and chemists in that order? Because these are the things that need to be the hierarchy of any ailment that's coming forward. Now, as I said before, the Secretary of State's already muted that people should be going to the chemist before they go to the doctors, realising that, as Dr. Barnett said, so 5 years ago we were 5,000 doctors short, and now it's 6,500. And no wonder people can't get appointments. I had an appointment with my orthopaedic surgeon, hoping to get a new knee joint. That soon faded away. But from that, it took me 3 weeks to get a an appointment with my GP surgery to discuss the way I'm moving forward. So, see, the problems is already starting to build up. As we move forward to the integrated care system, will you as a body be looking to have chemists, paramedics and nurses assisting doctors to treat people's ailments?
So we already do, and it's been long-term policy, certainly since 5-year forward view and taken through the long-term plan, to utilise allied health professionals, pharmacists, nurses, paramedics and mental health workers as part of additional roles within primary care networks. So those primary care networks across Wirral will be utilising those individuals and those professions. What the trick we have to pull off effectively is to ensure that they work as part of a system. So the pharmacists link as part of the primary care network. So the idea of the primary care network is it's almost your local integrated care system. The local GP practices talk to the local community pharmacists, community optometrists, etc. But recognising that whilst our pharmacists are highly skilled clinicians, there is a limit to their experience, and therefore there has to be part of that has to be as a whole team approach. So knowing when to hand on to the GP is also really important within that. So we already have those people in place in practices in Wirral, but in regard to pharmacy, I think we're better placed in some areas as well, because a lot in a number of general practices, those services are delivered by the local hospital pharmacy team, so you can create that integration of pharmacy support.
Chair, come back on that, because you did have a review of chemists and consultation that went out 18 months ago, if I'm correctly, because one of the things that I was greatly concerned of was losing the local one in my area in Easton. It's on the main shopping parade on the A41. Now that goes, we've only got one chemist, and that's in the doctor's surgery. And it's an awkward place to get to, Joe will tell you. Yeah. It's an awkward place to get to from most parts of the Easton. So it's one of the things that I'm really concerned about, that outside of those that are geared up to work with the hospitals and the doctor's surgeries, there's also the ones in the local communities that are absolutely essential for people like me who can't walk far, you know?
So I have to declare an interest, and I'm married to a farm. Well, no, I'm getting married to a pharmacist next April. I'm engaged to marry a pharmacist. So I have a level of understanding of what medicines optimisation in pharmacy is. So what you were talking about there is the local pharmacy needs assessment, which ensures that there are enough community pharmacies in the population that serve the population. So that's your clinician who happens to work in a shop, effectively. Then we have pharmacists who work in the hospital and dispense, and then we have pharmacists who work in terms of making sure that new drugs are introduced properly, that it's all done within budget and within the rules, and then we have those who actually help in terms of direct patient care. So it's a role that has really grown again over the last 10 to 15 years and pushed by the pharmacy community themselves, who were saying, we've got all these clinical skills, the NHS needs to use us. But you're right, the local pharmacy needs assessment. It's absolutely essential to ensure people can access a local pharmacy for either over-the-counter treatments or their prescriptions.
Other questions from members for Simon? Oh, Councillor Berry.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, at the last partnership meeting that we had, I raised an issue to do with ear syringing, and Councillor Phil Gilchrist, who was not at the meeting but who was watching it from home, contacted me the next day and said that he had a keen interest in this subject also. And he sent me some correspondence from yourself which he'd received. And in your correspondence, you said that, that this service was no longer available from your GP, but you were exploring alternative provision. I'd like to know, does that alternative provision, is it similar to what's being offered now by the private sector, which is a fee of probably £60–70, which a lot of people within Wirral cannot afford to pay that amount of money, and I do see that as privatisation, and the private sector were very quick to step in and fill that gap that exists. So can you tell me what the alternative provision might look like, and would there be a charge involved in it? Thank you.
So this was a national change to the GP contract. It was removed as an item of service, and therefore we're now having to respond to a national change. What we've been exploring is alternative provision that would be free at the point of delivery, so we wouldn't be expecting people pay for it, but obviously the NHS would have to pay for it as an item of service. We're looking at the clinical appropriateness of ear syringing at the end of a pathway, which would include, and you know, I'm not a clinician, but would include things like ensuring the person has tried other alternatives prior to syringing. So I will go back and I will see where we're up to in terms of that. The last time we looked at this, we did have a provider who was willing, an NHS provider who was willing to take this service up within a agreed financial envelope and with matching the demand that was already in place within the Wirral system. I think, to be fair, the national change took us a little bit by surprise. It wasn't flagged. We've had to respond to it as well as the other things are happening. So, but we are conscious that you know, local elected members, both members of Parliament and councillors, this is high on your post bags at the moment. You're getting a lot of local people quite rightly saying what's going on, and as you said, the private sector stepping in to fill a gap.
Thank you, Sam. Can I just come back on that? Because in Liverpool, you can still receive it free. So, you say it's national? Because Wirral you can't, but in Liverpool I know for a fact you still can in some areas.
Yes, so Wirral had that service commissioned in place already. When it was withdrawn as an item of service for our GPs, because we relied on GPs to do it, we're having to replace it. So you can in Wirral, and you can in Liverpool, and you will in Wirral be able to get it free.
If I may just ask, please, obviously, you know, obviously there isn't any, I appreciate you haven't had, obviously, the low, because obviously a lot of that comes into low clinical need, doesn't it? I know it hasn't been reviewed since 2019-20, I understand why. Is there any other things that are coming, sort of, that will be coming in that in the rest of this, sort of, at all, obviously, you think may be coming across that would need to be looked at for patients for Wirral, residents of Wirral?
So the ear syringing issue for me is a restoration of service, which we'll deal with. In terms of procedure low clinical priority, there will always be things coming in because the science and science changes and the evidence base changes. I think one of the things the Integrated Care Board will need to do is look at the policies of each of the CCGs and ensure there is some standardisation, and therefore would have to go through a period of consultation with the public to do that. Many of the policies were standardised back in 2019, and I remember back in 2005 leading on a piece of work across Cheshire and Merseyside on standardisation. So I think the core set of procedures will remain as they are, and then there will have to be some work, as I said, that is evidence-based and consults with the public upon any particular changes going forward.
Thank you, but then that wouldn't be place-based, would it? Because if you standardise the whole across Cheshire and Merseyside, Wirral is not the same as other areas, Sefton. So I don't quite sort of see how, because what we need on Wirral, residents of Wirral, is not the same as the other areas in across that. I know we're not discussing the full ICS, but that doesn't make sense to standardise. Well, and also, if we're saying about the residents, what they wish to do, consulting with them, it's not going to be the same as even from one ward to another ward in Wirral, to be honest with you.
I think we have to differentiate between standardisation of clinical policies, because a person with a hernia in Wirral is similar to a person with a hernia in Warrington as regard from the delivery of the service. So we were having this discussion earlier today around children and adolescent mental health services, or mental health services of children and people, as I prefer to call them. I know it's semantic, but it's less hostile in a title. But there is a view that we need to standardise the offer in terms of Tier 1 and Tier 2. And I agree we need common standards, but how you deliver those standards will vary according to the individual in front of you and the service you have locally and the availability of the service offer. So for us, so therefore it's about understanding what can be standardised at Cheshire Merseyside, what needs to be consistently applied across each place, and then how is that delivered in each place, or what is unique to each place in terms of the offer.
Diane, just quickly then, when will that consultation take place for Wirral?
I can't put a date on that because we're still going through the establishment of the Integrated Care Board, so we will know pretty soon who the Chief Executive is. We will then know who the Executive Team is, but those things are now what we're working through in terms of the transition close down process. So my job is to make sure that the business of Wirral CCG is handed over effectively, but also in other areas I'm leading on some work around medicines optimisation and learning disability services, where I was at a point we will say to the new director team, this is what you kind of need to work through, and we'll work through with you. But I can't put a date on when that's likely to happen.
No, there's only 5 months, isn't there? So I think it's obviously a mountain to climb, to be fair. Thank you. Councillor Brennan, did you want to? No, is that right? Councillor Baird?
So have I understood that right, that people on the Wirral, unlike people in Liverpool, can't have their ears syringed because of the implementation of the ICS?
No, that isn't what I said. What I said was there's been a national policy change to the GP contract. In Liverpool, they'd already had an additional set of services delivered through the Community Trust over and above what the GPs had in place. Therefore, the service in Liverpool was able to absorb that. In Wirral, we were very reliant on general practitioners to deliver this service. So that meant we've had to find a way of restoring the service in primary care, because we didn't have that backup of a community-based service. It has very little to do with the integrated care system, but it does have to do with a change in the general medical services contract.
But you said the delay of implementing free ear syringing for people on the Wirral is because you have to, for whatever reason, prioritise you're working on the ICS appointment of the Chief Exec and so on first.
No, I didn't say
okay.
that. No.
All right, I've misunderstood.
No, I didn't say that. As you'll see from the annual report, there's a lot of work around service redesign and transformation goes on, despite that we're doing the transition close down and despite we've had to do COVID. So actually, you know, what we try to organise ourselves to do is ensure that those people who can redesign pathways, get services in place, we don't trouble them with the transition close down stuff. That's what my immediate team does. So the delay in terms of the ear syringing has been responding to that change in the general medical services contract and then having to go through a process that is within the existing procurement law to find an alternative set of providers.
And you're not able to say when that ear syringing service will be available for Wirral residents?
I recall it being on one of our executive management teams within the last month where we made the decision to put the service in place and to commission it from a particular provider. I now need to go back and check, following your questions, when mobilisation is going to happen.
Thank you. no more questions. I'd just like to obviously, it was a very comprehensive report, so thank you, Simon, that you sent over. And obviously, thank you, obviously, and everything for everybody else does, especially with all the things you've got coming up, and obviously with the pandemic for everyone in the NHS and the CCG. If we could now, obviously, so thank you very much. Obviously, Simon staying for the next item on the agenda, if that's all right. If I could move to that, please. Oh, sorry, I do apologise. I forgot the recommendations again. The recommendations, obviously, for this is that the Partnerships Committee is recommended to note the report and supporting documentation, decide what further action it wishes to take. Councillor Berry? It's also asked us what further actions it wishes to take, or is that something the committee would like to discuss at a later stage? Or I think some of the things that I would suggest that Simon's mentioned this evening, like if the consultation, because I know they've got a lot going on, is some of the things that have been mentioned tonight, the answers, is perhaps we have a discussion around what we think further actions. Well, we've got the ICS, haven't we, a standalone, so it may be something that comes along to that for an update on some of the things that you've been discussing, besides, obviously, because the CCG is merging over. Thank you, Sam.
Wonder if you might want a response back on ear syringing, because it has been, as I said, high priority for local elected members, and if we can come back to you with here's the solution, that might provide some assurance as well.
Yeah, I think obviously that was one of the things. I think if the consultation is going to take place in that standardisation, I think that would be, is something that would affect Wirral residents. Is there anything else that would be suggested or at this present moment? Councillor Mitchell and Councillor.
Well, Chair, I was just going to suggest that Mr. Banks just send an email out to everybody. It'd be the easiest way of getting that information out. And given that we're having a one item issue in relation to the integrated care coming forward, that any issues that we need to deal with, we get the answers when that comes.
Would that be all right? Obviously, if we sort of bring any of those items onto there, is that all right with the committee? Is that okay? Councillor Bird?
So, on the work plan for the meeting on the 2nd of February, it has ICS, but it also has RNLI. So if it's going to be a single issue dedicated session, which I think it should be, then RNLI maybe needs to move to a different time.
Yeah, it's something we need to discuss on the work programme that is on the agenda in a moment, if that's all right. Is committee happy for those recommendations? And then we can sort of, is that right? Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor, sorry, I apologise, Councillor Berry, and then a second to Councillor Mitchell. Thank you very much, and thank you again, Sam. If we could just now move to item 8, the long COVID, on pages 361 and 364. One of the things, obviously, myself and the spokes did, obviously, and whilst obviously I know the report that Simon provided was a very in-depth report, it didn't mention, which we were quite surprised at, that there was no long COVID, which is obviously within that your annual report. So we went back to obviously committee services and said obviously one of the things we thought that was that's why this report has come as a standalone item. So I don't know if any members have got any questions on the, or actually what I'll do is I'll hand over to Simon in case you want to update anything further from the report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we've been involved in this on 2 levels. My colleague Nesta Hawker, who's the Director of Commissioning and Transformation, has been leading the Cheshire Merseyside response to long COVID and ensuring that the specialist clinic is in place at the Royal Liverpool Hospital, but also then locally making sure that we have a local long COVID multidisciplinary team in place. I just want to thank Ian Davis, who's the commissioning manager, for putting this report together for me. We have already got in place that long COVID clinic locally, and Wirral Community Health and Care NHS Foundation Trust has mobilised that very, very quickly indeed since the injection of the additional funds in August of this year. It ensures that we have a resource within Wirral as a place to which people can go that gives an individual patient focus, but also there's support around the psychological and respiratory components of dealing with long COVID, but also we have Citizens Advice Wirral in there in terms of the social prescribing impact, social prescribing component, because there's obviously an impact upon people's ability to to live and work with long COVID, and we clearly don't know what, at the moment, what the long-term impacts of that are at the moment. The clinic will be held at Victoria Central Hospital in Wallasey. The key performance indicators within there are set out, and as I said, the go live for the referrals is actually, as we speak, in early November. And the Community Trust started the MDT in October, so we're up and running with this service, and again, thanks to colleagues in the Community Trust for mobilising it so quickly and starting this multidisciplinary team and this service ahead of the other places in Wirral, in Cheshire and Merseyside as well.
Could I just ask some questions, please, Sam, before bringing any members in? So, obviously, the report stated that it was over, obviously, over in Liverpool. So, how did people actually access this? And whilst, obviously, as you said, there's been some funding coming in August, it doesn't sort of say how many people have been waiting for this or have been referred over to, obviously, for the service previously, and how many have been referred back now to, obviously, to the clinic. Obviously, that will be, obviously, in Wirral. And it says that it will go from November live for GPs, but we know long COVID's been around, obviously, for quite some time. So it was just if you could explain a little bit further on that, please. And it says, obviously, there's no financial implications, but I would imagine there would be some financial implications for the staffing, and obviously, depending on what people's long COVID is. It was just to clear that point as well, please. Thank you.
So the exact numbers we're still determining, because it is a new service and we still don't understand fully the demands around long COVID. So again, we can get some initial, if council officers supporting the meeting tonight can remind me tomorrow what I've promised to do, but we can get some numbers across to councillors about what we're currently seeing, experiencing, how many people have been transferred from Liverpool, if indeed anybody went to Liverpool. And then in terms of the financial implications, there are no financial implications as a result of this report, because it is a funded service and it will continue to remain in place. They need to see, because we need to follow this through.
Sorry, just for clarity, Simon, sorry, it's a new service on Wirral, but it's not been a new service, obviously, to the Liverpool, as it was appointed in November 2020. So I would imagine unless no residents from Wirral have been on the list. In the report to 3.1 was appointed in November 2020, the lead provider for Cheshire and Merseyside. It's been obviously delegated back, I would say, in November of this year, or August, as you said. So that was sort of how many people had gone from Wirral over to use the service, and then how many have obviously on the waiting list, or sort of, does that make a bit more sense? Sorry.
So what we'll do, we'll look to provide figures of how many Wirral residents Liverpool University Hospitals saw between November 2020 and the establishment of our local service, and then we'll look at figures in terms of how the local service have seen as well. Bearing in mind the Liverpool service would have had, whilst appointed in November 2020, there would have been a lead-in time to establish it as well. So we'll get those figures. So thanks for the clarification, Councillor.
Sorry, is there any other question, members, on the long COVID report? No? Okay, thank you very much. Can I just move to recommend? Thank you again, obviously, thank you for providing the additional report, Simon. They were basically asked for, the partnership is recommended to note the nationally prescribed commissioning arrangement for long COVID. So do I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Paul, Councillor Martin, thank you. I'll second if that's that way. Okay, and thank you again for your time this evening, as I say, Simon, as well. Can I also now move to the last item on the agenda, is item number 9, the work programme. Pages 365 to 372.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the purpose of this report is to ensure that you have the opportunity to contribute to the delivery of the committee's annual work programme. The report lists a number of items that are already on the work programme programme, but this is an opportunity for you to comment on those items or to add any further items that you may wish to add to the work programme.
Councillor Brennan, please.
I thought I'd get in on this one before Councillor Bird or Councillor Martin did.
I didn't
in the summer, we unanimously agreed to have a single item agenda on the ICS, and we discussed this under the work programme at the last meeting as well, where I thought we were clear we wanted a single item agenda on the ICS. So it would be lovely if we could have a single item agenda on the ICS, which I think probably involves moving the RNLI item to another meeting. And just to be clear as to why it should be a single item, in that discussion that we had in the summer, we said that we wanted to hear a variety of different voices and perspectives, and that we wanted to have time for us to be able to do that. And in my mind, what that means is that in addition to colleagues like Simon, we should also be hearing from health professionals, we should be hearing from health academics, we should be hearing from people who work in the NHS who aren't health professionals, we should be hearing from patient groups, and we should be hearing from any other groups with an interest in this matter, because I think it's important that we have as wide a spectrum as possible giving us their views about this very important change to our National Health Service.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. As you know, obviously at the last meeting we had the pool fund that was on with the ICS, so it was agreed at committee the pool fund would then go into a budget workshop. However, what then transpired from that committee to this committee and the spokes we met was because, sorry to put you on the spot, Mark, but the RNI, they couldn't come to the meeting that we had planned for them, unfortunately, because the report wouldn't be ready and obviously the feedback. So for the purposes at the spokes meeting, it was to be discussed because it comes on the agenda item, so we knew it could get discussed here. RNI was moved to February because obviously we will be at the end of the year at some time. So we need to have a discussion, obviously, Dan, obviously Mark, to see where the RNI will obviously, where it fits with them as well. But the reason why it was put to February was purely the fact is they couldn't come. I think it was suggested they could come in, well, they couldn't come in September, and I think one of the dates they couldn't come along to. So we need to have a discussion really with the RNI. But I do take your point because we did move the pool fund, you're quite right, obviously into a budget workshop to have a standalone item for the same reasons just mentioned. But I say when the spokes met, we do want the RNI to come back for their report. And I think because obviously we've got the environment, which is one of our remits here, but to put the RNI with that agenda item wasn't seen to be the best because it's not the same thing. And sometimes obviously the RNI can get, not confused, but get sort of, so that's why it wasn't suggested to go with that item. But again, we will revisit it because I think the ICS, I do agree, it should be a standalone item, to be fair, for all the reasons you've said. Is that all right? Sorry, Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. In the spirit of that discussion, I was looking through the work programme, and we've got the pooled fund session earmarked for February. Some part of this session, and by all means correct me if I'm wrong, will help to inform future budget discussions around the ICS. So we've got an ICS meeting scheduled for February. Might I suggest that the pooled fund session is brought forward to December or January on that basis?
By all means, you can just make the suggestion. Obviously, would that be, sorry to put you on the foot, but one thing, would that be something that would be feasible? Graham or Toby could have a discussion to just see. Would that be all right? If that's what the committee members think that would be, it does really make sense to sort of maybe have that discussion prior to obviously having the ICS meeting.
Yeah, I mean, clearly pooled fund arrangements are a fundamental part of what we're doing in relation to the ICS. But I would be happy to bring a report at whatever time the committee would like to take that report. So if you want that in December, then that can come in December.
It's a budget workshop now, isn't it? It's not coming to this, so it would be able to be a budget workshop prior.
Oh right, so yes, a separate workshop meeting.
A workshop,
yes,
a workshop
yes,
meeting,
of course, yeah.
On it, is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so is that okay? So are we? Sorry, I had to apologise. So are we happy, was the committee happy to move the suggestion that Paul, Councillor Martin mentioned? Are we happy with that? Any comments at all? Councillor Mitchell?
Just one of them, mate, and that's in relation to the RNLI. We've also got the flood risk management one on the 29th of March. If the RNLI could fit in that date, that would be beneficial, because one will counteract the other, because if we're going to have a lot more floods, I think we'll be calling on the RNLI to assist us.
Originally, sorry, Councillor Mitchell, originally the RNI was coming in March, obviously with that agenda item, because what we did at Spokes, obviously it was some time ago now, we put them together, because we did the same thing that they don't want people necessarily to do, is we put the RNI with that item. And then with the conversation with Mark, it was a case of, sometimes there is confusion over what the two things are. So maybe have another conversation, see if it was March, or maybe we could bring it not in February another time, or have a workshop maybe to feedback some other way, Mark. I don't know if you got any suggestions at all.
Yes, so Chair, I think the reason we couldn't bring it in September or November is because there is a reporting line for the RNLI nationally to put their statistics through that process. So that's why it had to go back. I think they would be more than happy to come back and fit in with any schedule post sort of January when the committee chooses to do that. And if I'll work with Dan to get a date in there and they can come and do that, Chair. Yeah, absolutely.
So is committee happy that we explore maybe going back to the March date further, and obviously maybe moving that on the work programme to March, if that's acceptable? Is that okay? Is that agreement? And so the ICS then will be a standalone, because the pool fund, as I say, we'll do. We'll get some dates for obviously a workshop, as is Councillor Martin suggested, in December or January before the ICS. Is committee happy with those? Yeah. Sorry, Graham.
Sorry, committee might chew my head off for this suggestion, but I'm just thinking about the way round that we've got this. So the pooled fund arrangement and the current pooled fund has been to Adult Social Care and Public Health Committee and has been signed off there. So there's a formal paper that goes with that. And obviously in terms of a workshop, we can look in much more detail at the pooled fund, what it delivers and who it delivers to. It strikes me that the what we're talking about in terms of the ICS presentation may well fit a workshop format better than a committee format. And the reason I say that is because in terms of the people that you want to hear from, there's quite a range of people. And I'm not sure how well that fits with the publication of papers in advance and whether people are, you know, how we would arrange that outside of a workshop. I don't know, maybe committee services would want to comment on that, but it's almost like the ICS one feels more like a workshop and the pooled fund one feels more like a committee paper. That's just my initial response.
I see what you mean, but obviously from the point of this remit, this committee, they don't have to be paper. We don't have to be obviously reports, because, for example, when Dr. Rob Barnett came, obviously I did check this out, and obviously we can actually, the committee can invite people, obviously, you know, that, so it's slightly different. I understand what you're saying from normal committees. I appreciate the suggestion, but I would say that it would probably be better in this formal structure and letting the pool fund stay in a budget workshop, unless anyone's got any other comments on that. But thank you for the suggestion. Is everyone happy to keep it as? Is that all right? Sorry, Vicky. So, are we? Would you mind summarising, obviously, from the discussion of the work programme? That'd be all right. That's assuming that we've made it quite clear, actually, Vicky.
Well, members, I think that the recommendation is obviously that you're noting the report subject to the comments that have been made by members for additions to the work programme, and perhaps Dan could just briefly summarise what he's written down.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, I can confirm that the additional resolutions that I've got noted are that we explore moving the RNLI item to March 2022 and holding the workshop on the pooled fund before the February meeting. Is that what members agreed? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Dan. Could we have that agreed by... Oh, sorry, I need to propose. I'll propose that. We have a seconder, please. Councillor Brennan. Could I agree that by assent, please? Okay, thank you. And that caused the end of this evening, which is, I think, it's been very interesting, very lot of questions, obviously. So thank you everybody for participation, and thank you, obviously.